Imagine this. You're the CEO of a company. You wake up one day, go into the office, and your assistant tells you that the company is in the middle of a firestorm. It turns out some of the employees composed a survey about what it's really like to work at the company and leaked it to the press. And these employees have some choice comments. One of them wrote that they have been through foster care and the treatment by senior leaders was arguably worse. Another employee wrote that there was a point where he or she was not eating, showering, or doing anything other than working from morning till midnight. A third employee wrote that they couldn't sleep anymore because their anxiety levels were through the roof. Your inbox is filled with emails from journalists wanting you to comment on hit pieces that they're about to publish. Your phone is blowing up with texts from board members. What do you do? That was the situation that CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, faced in 2021 when a group of employees created and published an anonymous survey about working at the firm. It's very tempting to want to do something, even drastic, in response to this. But if you understand the strategies of implementing meritocracy and developing human capital, the correct response would probably be to do nothing special. Hi everyone, in this video we're diving into one of the biggest unspoken truths about one of the key decisions you have to make when you lead a team, any team, big or small. That is, who should get promoted, who should gain power, and who should get the big money. Everyone loves to talk about meritocracy, the idea that the best people should rise to the top. It sounds simple, focus on performance, reward excellence. But here's the thing nobody really discusses. Implementing meritocracy is not so simple. There are actually two completely different ways to build a meritocracy, and choosing the wrong one can lead to burnout and can bring your team down. So let's break them down in this video. Now, the group of junior analysts who created and then conveniently leaked their internal survey in 2021 had a point. They were working 100-hour weeks and getting just 5 hours of sleep a night. A lot of people would agree that their working conditions were inhumane. What's more, a large majority of the analysts said they were being micromanaged, and almost everyone said they were being given unrealistic deadlines. A majority of them said they sought counseling due to the conditions. At the time this was happening, I was teaching my MBA courses, and I had some students who worked in banking, including Goldman Sachs. All I had to do was simply ask my class about this, and everyone, especially former employees of Goldman Sachs and other banks, confirmed that the survey was describing what real life was like for them. No one disputed the truth behind this survey. Now, as I said, the initial response most people would have to this is that it's outrageous and terrible. Nobody should be subjected to these conditions ever. However, looking at the survey a little bit more closely, there was another question that the junior analysts were asked. The question was, how likely are you to recommend Goldman Sachs as a place to work? Now, you might think that the answer was absolutely horrible, but in fact, it wasn't all that bad. They were basically at the midpoint of the scale in responding to that question. In other words, the employees said that life at their employer was hell, but they'd be okay with recommending it to another person. Let's try to understand why that happened. So first thing to note is that the employees are not irrational and they're not experiencing Stockholm Syndrome. It turns out that there are two distinct strategies for developing human capital and implementing meritocracy. The first approach is called sorting. Sorting is all about identifying and selecting the right or best fitting people for their roles. The idea is that we have to hire the right people, and the cream would rise to the top. So we have a selection process that's extremely difficult in one way or another. And once new hires join, they go through a culture that's extremely difficult in one way or another. Eventually, this weeds out employees for whom this is not the right place. Those who are not right for us leave. And that's okay with us because that's part of the plan. Because for some people, maybe it's just a small fraction, but for some people, our extreme culture is just what they want. And so those people stay with us and they thrive. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. Our culture is extreme in one or more dimensions, and this makes it more likely that the people who stay are actually a good fit for what we think is important for us. The second approach is elevating. Elevating focuses on having the right recipe, investing in people with training and development and mentoring and good growth opportunities to help employees build skills and become better and better over time. Eventually, we hope they'll be able to fill senior leadership positions. This is in contrast to the sorting approach. Here, our culture is not so extreme. Instead, our culture builds people over time. We don't want people to leave. We want them to stay and learn. We have the right incentives, processes, training to make people who start out with us as mediocre become amazing eventually. Now, most companies blend both approaches, but one of them usually dominates in each company. So let's look at some real-world examples. Let's start with sorting. As you might imagine, Goldman Sachs and other competitive investment banks generally adopt sorting strategies. They have extreme cultures. They're characterized by extreme hours, pressure to perform, survival of the fittest mentality. Also, top consulting firms like McKinsey, BCG, and others have their famous up or out policy. That's also an element of a sorting strategy. Of course, these companies may have elements of mentoring or training, but the key emphasis is on sorting. Okay? But there are also less intuitive examples of sorting. For example, Starbucks was an up-and-coming coffee shop chain in the 1990s. At the time, it was just one of many upstarts. It wasn't the big brand that it is today. One of the key elements that enabled them to grow and succeed was incredible customer service by their baristas. The company asked baristas far more than just make coffee. Baristas were supposed to remember customers' names and engage in conversations and generally be extremely friendly and warm during this critical growth period for the company. They weren't just making your latte, they were auditioning to be your best friend. Now, this is an extreme culture. Not everyone can work a barista's job and also be extremely friendly to customers throughout the day. For introverted people, this would be hell. But for very extroverted people, this is the exact environment they thrive in. And so, Starbucks' strategy back then was similar to sorting, except not for long hours or extreme pressure, but rather for extreme friendliness. Trader Joe's has a similar sorting strategy. They screen hard for friendly, outgoing people who smile in the first 30 seconds of an interview because they're trying to look for natural cultural fit up front. Now, let's take an example of elevating. In the 1980s, General Motors, then one of the biggest companies in the world, had the worst auto plant in the United States, perhaps the world. This plant is located in Fremont, California, by the way, where Tesla is now. That's a story for another time. The list of horrors from this plant almost defy belief, but trust me, they're true. Look at the links below. Workers would openly drink alcohol during shifts. They would deal drugs, including pot, during breaks. They would openly gamble and have gambling rings during lunch breaks. People would regularly steal parts and tools. They would engage in fist fights on the job. They would go on strike over minor grievances. Even illicit sex occurred on the factory floor. Employees and managers were fighting with each other so hard that some of the employees intentionally damaged vehicles. They would put Coke bottles in door panels to create rattles, or they would put on the engines backwards. It was total disaster. Fortunately for GM, Toyota at the time was trying to gain a foothold in the United States. And in the absence of willing sellers, Toyota decided to take a huge risk and buy into a joint venture with GM for this ridiculously troubled plant. Amazingly, Toyota kept 85% of the workforce that did these horrible things, that was drinking, doing drugs, all these things. What Toyota did change, though, was the processes these people worked under. And this is an example of elevating. Toyota did the following. They allowed employees, no matter how junior, to stop the production line at will. This was a big deal because 1 minute of stoppage was about $15,000 of cost. GM would never have let them do that because it's very expensive. But Toyota allowed employees to stop the line to get to quality issues and solve them immediately. It sent a strong message of trust in their employees, the total opposite of GM. Second, Toyota created a flatter hierarchy, 6 levels down to 3 levels. Third, Toyota instituted a rule that said no layoff unless management takes a pay cut first. And fourth, they created a program where they sent their best employees to Japan to the headquarters of Toyota for training as a bonus. Toyota did other things too, but that was the gist. Over time, the new processes led to better and better results, using almost the exact same people who under the old system were a total disaster. This is a clear example of elevating. There was very little sorting. There was very little replacement or choosing the right people or extreme culture. Instead, the same people were used, but in a different system. Toyota changed the system, and the exact same people flourished. The output of this formerly terrible auto plant was so good that it competed with Toyota's own flagship plant in Japan. Now, although elevating sounds a lot better than sorting to most people, the truth is that both strategies are viable and they have their pros and cons. For sorting, the pros are that it's an efficient way to identify talent. There's relatively little investment in training, and you allow people to sort themselves into those who stay and those who go. Second, sorting forces managers to address underperformance. That's a big issue in many organizations. Underperformance is less likely to be tolerated in a sorting system than an elevating system. Third, sorting creates a huge motivation from competition. For some people, the big rewards push them to give maximum effort. However, there are also cons to sorting. The cons are that it damages collaboration. It can turn into cutthroat, it can turn into politics, short-term gaming, really bad conflicts. Second, it lowers morale. People have a very interesting way of being shocked at how competitive or difficult things can get, even if they were notified well in advance of what they're getting into. And third, there's a risk that you are sorting for the wrong traits. A company that puts all of its eggs in the basket of sorting must make sure that it's sorting for the traits that actually matter in the marketplace. For example, Goldman Sachs has to be 100% sure that working long hours under constant pressure is something that's necessary for success. Otherwise, the entire sorting mechanism would lead to choosing the wrong people. In contrast, for elevating, the pros are: one, it leads to higher retention and loyalty. People feel that the organization is investing in them and cares about them. Second, it can build long-term organizational strength, because what you're doing is you're building knowledge and skill transfer over many years. Third, elevating can boost morale by focusing on growth and avoiding cutthroat competition and conflict. However, elevating has some cons too. First, it's slower to spot and promote true top talent. You may end up keeping ineffective employees for a long time with elevating. Second, sometimes the elevating strategy can be used as an excuse to avoid tough performance conversations. The phrase "we're all in this together" can be used as an excuse sometimes. Third, there are higher upfront costs in training and upskilling employees compared to the sorting strategy. So when should you use each of these strategies? So you should use sorting when your success depends on an extreme specific culture or an extreme trait that only a few people have and only a few people can thrive in without burning out. You should use sorting when you don't have enough resources to train extensively, so it's better to attract ready-made talent. And if you already have a brand name like Goldman Sachs, where you can attract prospective employees despite a reputation for an extreme culture, you should use sorting. In contrast, elevating works better when clear performance metrics are hard to define, when you need to attract talent without having a huge hook or a brand name. You can offer growth and training instead of that. And third, if you value positive experience going to work every day, elevating tends to work better. So meritocracy isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's about choosing the right strategy, sorting or elevating. Goldman Sachs CEO's response to the crisis they faced in 2021 after the employee survey was to raise salaries. So given what we know now about sorting, do you think that was the best response? Think about this alternative. The CEO could have said, look, I know Goldman is a difficult place to work. And you know what? Tough. That's the way we planned it. If you can make it here, we'll be together for a long time. If you can't, thanks for your service, truly. But I guess we're not a perfect match for each other after all. That's the essence of sorting. And then there's the opposite, elevating, that other organizations follow, and some of them very successfully. So what do you think? Does your company lean more towards sorting or more towards elevating? Tell me in the comments below. In the next video, we'll build on this material and ask how to choose the best environment for you. As an individual, are you going to do better in a sorting environment, or are you going to do better in an elevating environment? If you found this video helpful, hit the like and subscribe. We'll talk more about careers and self-development and organization later on. See you soon.